dream. I still hear my mother praying every day. I'm an African in New York. You didn't see I'm from my pride and energy. When I walk out down the street, you can hear it in my accent when I talk. I'm an African in New York. Oh, I'm an alien. I'm a legal alien. I'm an African in New York. Oh, I'm an alien. I'm a legal alien. I'm an African in New York. I'm gonna get. I'm gonna get. I'm gonna get. Gonna get. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it. Nothing gonna stop me from the paper that I need. And I go hustle till we free. Living like out here where they let you go. Cause back home, I promise not to be cold. And I see my brothers and sisters on the train. They say a lot of we just alright. We're gonna make it through the rain. Cause in the end, we only got one life. Oh, I'm an alien. I'm a legal alien. I'm an African in New York. Oh, I'm an alien. I'm a legal alien. I'm an African in New York. I'm gonna get. I'm gonna get. I'm gonna get. Gonna get. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it.
And of course, that is the one and only Shirazem. And the name of the song is An African in New York. And this song has been done like how many times? It has been done like so many times. I know about the Jamaican in New York. I know about the African in New York. I know about another different one that was done. And all the versions normally are examined. But nonetheless, I want to welcome each and every one of us to the 54 Correspondence Show on the Black Hot Fire Network. My name is Pikes, and this is a show we get to discuss different matters affecting us as a Black people globally. And I will give a special focus on the 54 countries on the African continent. That is why we do call it the 54 Correspondence Show, in case you're wondering. And we do have correspondence. We do have news coming from all the 54 states. And we might not be able to cover all the 54 countries, but at least we are able to shape your opinion, or we are able to inform your perspective regarding the African continent. That is the main goal for this particular show. We understand that it might be too early for some of the family to join us on the show, but nonetheless, we still keep it moving. And of course, I know some of the rest of the other family might be able to check out the replay of this particular one and get to find out what is happening in Africa. If I was Jamaican, I would actually say what a going Africa, which really means what's going on Africa. But really, we do not use a lot of Jamaican patois right here on the African continent, but we do have some people who are inclined to that particular one as well. In Swahili, we want to say karibuni sana. Swahili is one of the largest spoken languages on the African continent, and on the Black Hot Fire Network, we have been training, or we have been teaching Swahili over the weekends, so that we can still be able to connect our people globally. It doesn't matter whether you are in the DRC Congo. It doesn't matter whether you are in South Africa, or whether you are in Zambia or Zimbabwe. I do hope that you are able to. You really have one language, or have an understanding of an African language. Samuel from Jamaica, you're saying here till 6:30. It's 6:30, I do believe. But Samuel, I played as a song earlier by Shirazi, but I think you have heard the original, not the original really, but have you heard the rendition that did have Jamaican in New York? I think you know the song I'm talking about. Let me just play a little bit of what I was playing earlier. This is an African in New York, but we did have the other earlier version, which was a Jamaican in New York.
Oh, I'm an alien. I'm a legal alien. I'm an African in New York. I'm gonna live. I'm gonna live. I'm gonna.
And that is a little bit of what was happening now. But also, Shinehead did their own rendition. And Shinehead, I think their rendition was also jamming. If you ask me, at the end of the day, I think their rendition was also one of the most jamming renditions. And this is how they sounded.
Yo, oh man, yo, shine again, let me not show you, man. Back to back, we are giving it away. Really, you know. Now I'm going to everything up, sing for us one stop in life, I'll try to say, yeah, yes. Don't drink coffee, I drink boots, my dear. And I love my morning ride.
I think the Jamaican one is jamming more than the African one. We do have the Jamaican in New York, and we do have the African in New York. I think the Jamaican one is jamming. That was a Shinehead. The other one was by Shirazi. But nonetheless, I was talking about the importance of really just having an African language that you can be able to connect with. I do believe it's very, very much important that you are able to at least, learn one African language in the course of your life. And when you tour Africa, in case you haven't been to Africa, you can be able to connect or to converse with the local people, even in their own language. And it's very, very much important. And I do know for a fact that when we went to Tanzania, because we do speak the same language, if you're coming from Kenya, get over the border and get to Tanzania, and you're speaking in their own language, there is some sort of an ease. People feel much more at ease when you're conversing in their own local language. And that is why I do believe we shall be resuming our Swahili classes for the weekend, so that if anyone would like to join us on that particular class, you can be part and parcel of the class. And we also do have notes. We also do have an interesting Swahili guidebook that I personally did put together. It's available on lulu.com, Lulu Books. Is it lulu.com or Lulu Books? Yeah, it's on Lulu Books. And of course, if you look for the Swahili phrase, Swahili introduction, or the Swahili introduction, a guidebook, you will be finding it right there. And you can also be able to get a little bit of the notes and get to learn with us as we continue as a family on the Black Hot Furniture. You're saying both sound good to me. I think they all both of them are good, but I was just saying that when you make a rendition of a rendition, for example, I make a cover song of a cover song, then it's sort of what can I call it? It's not as good, I think. If you come and did a cover song of an original song, then someone comes and did the cover song of that cover song, it's a little bit cumbersome. But nonetheless, it's a little bit not really so nice. But nonetheless, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And today we want to discuss a very, very important matter that have to do with our people in Africa and also our people globally. And I am talking about our mindset as African. And we have had in numerous cases about the description the description of the African, especially in some books, or especially in the way the African has been portrayed in movies, or the way the African has been portrayed in different media. Normally, the African has been portrayed as backward in thinking. The African has been portrayed as, languishing in hunger and poverty and disease. The African has been portrayed as not even being, with any kind of a spiritual inclination. The African has also been painted as being the one with the black magic and being the one who does all sorts of sorcery and witchcraft. The African has been painted as so many other things, like I'm talking about with with media, different sorts of media, be it electronic media, be it literature, be it magazines, be it on the TV and film. All sorts of images have been painted about the African, and all of these, most of these particular descriptions or depictions of the African have fallen short of what the African is. They are not even close, not even falling short. They are not even close to what the African is. And you might ask me, why do I say so? Because there has been a global agenda to keep the African at the bottom, and we all know about this. There has been a global agenda to keep the African at the bottom, and this has really been accomplished by use of the media and the portrayal of the African as backward in thinking, as a primitive, as all sorts of things that you might find, all sorts of things that you might find being portrayed about the African people as being unsophisticated. And the African, at some point, has also been blamed, has also been blamed or has also been painted in the negative for being African. So it's like there is also a problem when it comes to the African being African. And this is a kind of a thing that has been propagated, of course, using propaganda, of course, using, like I said, all these kind of a media on different platforms. And of course, on this particular broadcast for today, I would just like to a little bit to sort of really guide or really try and inform the perspective of anyone who might have carried on this particular kind of a thought. There is one important question. What was the African doing around the 15th century or even around the 13th century or the 14th century? There has been the depiction of Africa because of the what can I call it? Our African history has been falsified. People will tell you that Africans in the 13th century, these were Africans are living in the forest. These were people doing all sorts of primitive things and all sorts of stories that will be told about Africa. But I want to take us a little bit back before we get into the conversation around the decolonizing of the African mind. And I want to go a little bit back into history so that I can actually also correct the opinion of some people who might think that the African in the 13th century, in the 12th century, in the 10th century was primitive Africans, while not primitive, and they are not primitive in any kind of regard. I want to share this brief video so that you can also go back into history, because the lack of knowledge of our history has been one of the contributing factors as to why the African mind is still binded, as to why the African mind is still chained, because of the lack of knowledge on our African history. It's very, very sad when I say that African history is really not taught in schools. What you are taught as African history is European history. They come up and tell you in 1498, there was the arrival of the Portuguese on the East African port. There was the arrival of the Portuguese on a place what we do call as the Vasco da Gama in Mombasa. They tell you in 1480s, there was the arrival of this and that other European on the continent. But what was happening before the 1498? That is where, for me personally, let me talk about myself personally. When I was in school, learning about history, the beginning point for me, where I actually now came to realize, oh, this is what we're studying, was about the Vasco da Gama and the arrival of the Vasco da Gama. And they were actually called as European explorers. That is what not they were. They were not coming around to explore. They did have a mission with them, but that is what has been taught to me. But before 1498, when there was the arrival of the Portuguese on the East African coast, what were the people on African continent doing? Which is a very, very also important question, and I wanted to share with us briefly on the same, a little bit of a presentation with the same, and then we shall have our important conversation as to why the mind of the African is still colonized and what we need to do to be able to decolonize the African mind right here on the Black
The year 1492 is of great significance to the Western world because that's when Christopher Columbus sailed the Atlantic Ocean, landing in the New World. We make a pretty big deal about it. Since this date is so significant to us, I thought I'd talk about what was happening in Africa around this time in the late 15th century. What up, African World? It's Team here, and I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And as always, if you want to support the home team, you can do so on patreon.com. I have some new rewards for you guys, so be sure to check that out. Also, go to afrographics.com, a website where you can find unique illustrative infographics summarizing African history. All links to Patreon, Afrographics, and home team merchandise are in the description box below. First, I want to put some things in context. We all know that Christopher Columbus was not the first to sail the Atlantic Ocean, and many people now seem to be aware that other people also sailed the Atlantic. But seldom do we explore when Africans did so.
You see the drip, I'm fitted up. Hop in my car and let's get it up. Secure the bag, yeah, I get the bus. Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up.
It's said that an African king of the Mali Empire named Abubakar Keita II sailed the Atlantic Ocean long before Columbus, a whole century before him to be exact. Now, the success of his trip is a mystery, but the fact that he did this is well documented by Mansa Musa himself. The Arab Egyptian scholar named Al Umari, who spoke with Mansa Musa concerning how he ascended the throne, wrote down what the Malayan king told him. According to Al Umari, this is what Mansa Musa told him. The ruler who preceded me did not believe it was impossible to reach the extremity of the ocean that encircles the earth. He wanted to reach that end and was determined to pursue his plan. So he equipped 200 boats full of men and many others with water, gold, and provisions, sufficient for several years. He ordered the captain not to return until he had reached the other end of the ocean or until he had exhausted the provisions and water. So they set out on their journey. They were absent for a long period, and at last just one boat returned. When questioned, the captain replied, "O Prince, we navigated for a long period until we saw in the midst of the ocean a great river which flowed massively. My boat was the last one. Others were ahead of me, and they were drowned in the great whirlpool and never came out again. I sailed back to escape this current, but the Sultan would not believe him. He ordered 2,000 boats to be equipped for him and for his men, and 1,000 more for water and provisions. Then he conferred the regency on me for the term of his absence, and departed with his men, never to return or show any sign of life. In this manner, I became the sole ruler of the empire." In fact, Columbus himself was apparently inspired to take his third voyage because of hearing rumors of Africans sailing the Atlantic. According to the abstract of Columbus's log made by Bartolomeo de las Casas, the purpose of Columbus's third voyage was to test both the claims of King John II of Portugal that canoes had been found which set out from the coast of Guinea and sailed to the west with merchandise, as well as the claims of the native inhabitants of the Caribbean island of Hispaniola that from the south and the southeast had come black people whose spears were made of a metal called ganin, from which it was found that of 32 parts, 18 were gold, 6 were silver, and 8 copper. Columbus and the people of the Iberian Peninsula of Portugal and Spain were very familiar with African people. In fact, the only reason that Columbus was able to sail to the Americas in 1492 was because the Spaniards had just taken back Spain from the Moors after 700 plus years of North African subjugation. Columbus was no slouch at all. He knew very well that the Moors had navigation skills as they sailed the sea to come to Spain to begin with. So Columbus took with him a Moor named Pedro Alonso Nino, who was the navigator or pilot of Columbus's first and third journey. Now, with all that context out of the way, what was going on in the rest of Africa around 1492 during the late 15th century? Well, in West Africa, the classical empire of Songhai was just in its first phases. The great founder of the Songhai Empire, Sunny Ali, just died in 1492, but during his tenure, he was dismantling the Mali Empire, becoming the greatest conqueror king West Africa had ever seen. Sunny was the most powerful warrior king and had more soldiers than any of his predecessors. In his expeditions, he subdued many lands and became feared amongst his enemies. The Tariq el Fatash, a book written by an African scholar at Timbuktu, had this to say about Sunny Ali. Chi Ali was always victorious and destroyed all the countries that he chose. None of his armies in his presence were defeated. Always the conqueror, never defeated. Right under the vast Songhai Empire lie the Empire of Benin. Benin during this time in 1492 was ruled by the great Oba Azolua. During his long period as sovereign, Azolua transformed Benin from a moderately large kingdom into an empire. Hailed as Azulua the Conqueror, oral histories report that he fought more than 200 battles. Even though his reign was marked with some instability, he still managed to expand Benin into an empire, and by 1492, his reign was well seasoned and Benin growing. Oba Azulua was the son of the legendary king Oba Awari the Great of Benin, and because of his accomplishments, Oba Azulua became a very important Oba in both the history of the Benin Empire and in the folklore and celebrations in the region. In Central Africa, for the Kanem Empire, 14.
And I might not be able to share the whole of these African history. And this pertains to what was happening in Africa around the time 1492. In 40, yes, in 1492. And if you look at that particular story and the presentation, you might hear of Benin. And Benin is a country I do believe was a part and parcel of the Songhai Empire because we also did have the Timbuktu, which I do believe the colleges were also built around this particular time before 1492. There was a colleges in Africa. Around the same time, we have heard about the stories of the sailors or the explorers who did come from the from African continent in West Africa and went into the Atlantic in terms of with a quest to explore the outside. And when you talk about Christopher Columbus, coming and doing his exploration in 1492, and you ask yourself, what was the African also doing before 1492? You realize that the African was also sophisticated and he had also embarked. He was not, you will not talk about African being poor in 1492 and the African being, all living in poverty, all living in disease and things like this, because there has been that particular agenda of falsifying African history and making it seem as if African history begins with colonization. That is what they want to make it seem, that African history begins with colonization. But if you look at West Africa, yes, we did have West African explorers who, of course, are transversing and are moving across the Atlantic Ocean and even going into other areas of the world. But because of this lack of history, lack of knowledge of our history, so many of the African minds have been colonized. And today we are discussing about the important matter of decolonizing our African minds. And one of the things, one of the tools that has been used, like I said, is falsified history and manipulation of our heritage and our history. And unless we are able to get our history right, and unless we are able to get also, to understand better in terms of the African heritage and the African culture and history, then we shall be stuck at the same point thinking that the African mind is inferior. Like I said, the African has been portrayed as being inferior, as being backward, as being uncultured, as being all sorts of things, as lavishing in hunger and disease. Well, that is not what used to happen. The African history, like I said in school, personally, when I was in school, I was introduced to history. And the part that I actually realized I was studying history was the part that we were told, we did have in 1498 the arrival of the Portuguese explorer. His name was Vasco da Gama. He came with a team with his ship the East African coast, and he set up a center known as Vasco da Gama. If I go to Mombasa today, which is one of the cities on the East African coast, you might think that that particular building has been there forever. But before that particular kind of a building was set up, the Vasco da Gama, which was set up by the Portuguese in 1498, we did have Africans doing exploits, mighty exploits. We did have Africans moving and traversing around the world as well. But, there has been the falsification of African history, which is meant to teach us that Africans, around that particular time when the explorers came, Africans were living in the forest. Africans were, they were part and parcel of the Amazon, or not the Amazon, but the Congo forest. That is why we did have most of our people stationed at, and they were eating animals, and they were doing all sorts of these other things. But that is not the truth. We did have a little bit of our history that I have shared with us so that you can get to understand what was happening with the African in the year before the year 1492. Sister Liberia, you saying YouTube took my video on people not wanting to get the shot in the medical field. They won't let me go live. Damn. Sister, do you have a backup channel? Please, I would advise, if you do not have a backup channel, there is a war on our people and the war on the information that is being shared out. So I think you would rather be good having a backup channel or even two backup channels, because it is what it is. And we also saw, that the justice system saying, the information is irrelevant, the information is not accurate, and this is not. Is a system are pushing back. They do not want any kind of information going out there, and the people getting to understand what is happening with the whole wiping or the killing of our people using this particular one. But nonetheless, yes, let me share a little bit more of this so that people can understand what was Africa like before the colonizers came, before even the explorers. Not the colonizers, but they have been christened as explorers. These were not explorers, but what was Africa like even before Columbus or even before the Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese came around?
1892 was a crucial moment. Years earlier, the Kanembu were defeated by the Bulala, and the capital of Njimi was taken over. In 1484, the ruler of Kanem, Mai Ali Gaji, constructed a new capital in Borno in northern Nigeria called Ngazagarma. And from that base, the Kanembu intermarried with the local population, creating a new ethnic group called the Kanuri. The establishment of a new base for refugees of Kanem was crucial for the revival of the Kanem Empire. And so, in 1492, Mai Ali Gaji was able to rally the troops and begin conquering a lot of territory with the end goal of reconquering their homeland. And in 1497, Mai Ali Gaji had developed his Borno Empire to such an extent that he was able to return to Kanem and retake the ancestral capital of Njimi from the Bulala. This event was no doubt one of the greatest moments in Central African history and the most important event for the survival of the Kanem Empire's legacy. Also in Central Africa, it was the beginning of the end for the Congo Empire. In 1492, Congo was just being introduced to Christianity for the first time by the disingenuous motives of the Portuguese.
And of course, that now marks the decline of, the good days, or the prosperity. Let me not call them seasons, or the prosperous days in which kingdoms were thriving. And as you can see, soon as the Portuguese and also soon as all these other different crackers came to Africa with their religion, that is the next point where we get to, because I've talked about, first and foremost, the lack of knowledge of our African history, and people being, learning of falsified information of the African was in the jungle, or the African was really uncultured and things like this. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, what you get to realize is that all these things are lies. And unless you actually commit yourself to finding out the truth on the African history and also get to discover what was happening, you will still also believing in the same kind of a darkness. That is the first and foremost. That is one of the biggest problems as to why we do still have many Africans' minds being colonized and them feeling inferior for all sorts of reasons, because they do believe that from the start or from the go, we always do come last. But if you look at what we were sharing on this particular video earlier on, you do hear over the different empires. This is the Congo Empire. And around this particular time when we did have the Portuguese coming into the continent of Africa and introducing religion, that is also another point where we need to highlight that is we started now having the decline and having also, the colonizing. The religion also has played, is one of the tools, one of the biggest tools used to colonize the African mind. And like you will hear here, when the Portuguese go to the Congo, and now they started ordering things, they started making it seem as if this is what has been ordained, this is a message from the all, and this, there are consequences, you might go to hell and things like this. The people's mind were binded, like we all know, the religion and the word where it actually comes from. The people's minds were actually binded, and these started seeing the decline of the Congo Kingdom. The Congo Kingdom was really, really large. It also encompassed areas such as Angola, the current day, the DRC Congo, the current day, I do believe, Central African Republic, and also places like Malawi, and also Tanzania and Rwanda and Burundi. This was all part of the Congo Kingdom. And religion, like we know, has been used. And even till today, I don't know why people do not wake up and the African mind will not liberate themselves free from all these religions that have been used to make it seem, or to have people think that worshiping the oppressor serves them any kind of a benefit.
King Nzinga Nkulu sent his ambassador Kasuta to Portugal and instructed him to request priests, carpenters, and stonemasons to build a house of prayer. He also sent Congolese nobles and children to learn Portuguese and become Christians. In 1491, King Nzinga Nkulu of Congo was baptized and officially accepted Christianity. His baptism was well documented, as he said to have sat on a throne carved of ivory and wood, which was placed on a high platform. and he also wore a tall crown they called mpu. The primary reason for the conversion of King Nzinga Nkugu was articulated by Alan Schofield. It was only then the Portuguese learned the real reason for the quick conversion. The kingdom was on the point of civil war. Several people were rebelling against the central power, and that Mwenyeji was about to help his son, Alfonso, put down the revolt. Naturally, he wanted Portuguese aid. One must try to imagine the Portuguese at this moment. There were not many of them by comparison with their black host. They had come to this remote place to proselytize and begin a trading organization, and within a few weeks of their arrival, they were being asked to take part in a war which did not concern them in the least. But the request came from a brother in Christ, and it was not possible to refuse. So a black army marched out on the Central African field of battle under the banner of the cross, accompanied by a number of white mercenaries carrying muskets. It is hardly surprising that they won the day and returned to the capital in triumph. In gratitude, the Mwenyeji settled the Portuguese in one section of the town not too far from his own palace, and the two races lived in such amity that doors, it is said, were never closed, and there was no need for guards. The coexistence had begun. Even though King Nzinga Nkugu clearly had other motivations for his conversion, the actions he took to integrate the Portuguese into Congolese society had disastrous effects, especially because his son, a true convert to Christianity, thought of the Portuguese as his Christian brothers, while they certainly did not think of him or the Congolese as such. They sought to control Congo and drain it of its resources. In southern Africa, around 1492, the Shona kingdom of Mwenyeji became the premier Shona state in the region. The founder of Mwenyeji, Inyatsimba Mutota, had a son named Matope, who extended Mutapa into an empire during this time. King Matope became very wealthy by exploiting copper and ivory from the Middle Zambezi. King Matope's armies overran the kingdom of Manyika, as well as the coastal kingdoms of Keteve and others, turning Mwenyeji into a vast empire. Much later, a Portuguese chronicler named Antonio Bacaro tells us about Mwenyeji. The emperor shows great charity to the blind and maimed, for these are called the king's poor, and have land and revenues for their subsistence. And when they wish to pass through the kingdoms, wherever they come, food and drinks are given to them at the public cost as long as they remain there. And when they leave that place to go to another, they are provided with what is necessary for their journey and a guide, and someone to carry their wallet to the next village. In every place where they come, there is the same obligation, under penalty that those who fail therein shall be punished by the king. Moving along to East Africa and Ethiopia, the year 1492 was during the reign of Emperor Eskender. Eskender, a prominent Christian king, sought to make war on the Muslims in Ethiopia. It was during this time that raids and counter-raids between the Ethiopian Christians and Muslim powers intensified. This period was the beginning stages of determining which religion would have dominion over Ethiopia, Christianity or Islam. It was said that Emperor Iskender was of a bold disposition and was an expert horseman and well trained in the use of bow, shield, and spear. And at the same time, he was gracious, compassionate, and merciful. Previously, in 1487, King John II of Portugal, who had always been eager to enter into communication with Prester John, the mythical Christian ally of Africa, sent on a mission to the east the navigators Perdo de Covoham and Alonso de Pavia. In 1491, de Covoham entered Ethiopia and made his way to the court of Eskender, where the king was.
And as you hear with this particular presentation, this was the final days of the Congo Empire. And the Congo Empire, like you do here, even before the Columbus came in, or before the Portuguese were anywhere to be seen on the African continent, we did have different kingdoms, and they were thriving in different ways. Like you did have Timbuktu already did have its colleges. The Congo Empire was also, was also well off, and people were living in good conditions, enjoying the world, with their body, with the gold and other different resources having been exploited from the African continent. And like you also did here, Columbus himself was also inspired by stories about African explorers or explorers from Africa that were getting to discover, what were traversing all over the world and moving around in discovery. So you cannot say
They
Christopher
didn't
Columbus.
discover the world, Spike. They already knew the world. The Africans were not discovering the world, Spike. They already knew the world. They were already
Yeah.
everywhere. So white people discovered. Stop taking the white person's damn cargo points. These black people they're discovering. They were already all over the world. That's how the white people knew about the rest of the world from black people. Cologne, his
Yeah.
name was in Columbus, Christopher Columbus, who wasn't even Italian, from northern. He was an Ashkenazim from northern Spain, but northern Al-Andalus. There was no Spain yet.
Yeah.
Learned navigation from the Moors. They're the ones that taught his ass. That's why you can never find his diary no more. He said, I learned at the feet of the Moors who taught him how to sail. The Moors were the ones who told him about America, of the new world to white people. It wasn't new to black people. Black people had kingdoms over here too. We already were selling back and forth in trade. That's why when you come to America, you got caves and parts of America. There's nothing but black artifacts everywhere. Everywhere. Thousands of years ago. So don't take the white man's narrative. So yeah, you had some black explorers. They weren't explorers. They'd already explored the world thousands of years ago. They were just going back and forth. This was the known world to African people. It was known. It was unknown to white people. This stuff using that narrative is if oh go ahead. Go ahead, Spike.
No, I was just saying there are two tools that have been used to colonize the African mind. One of it is a lack of our knowledge of our history. People have forgotten our history, and I was just reminding people about what was happening in Africa before 1492. And because when I personally went to school and I was being introduced to African history, like I always keep on telling you, has been taught to me when the Portuguese got to Africa. I was taught about the 1498 when the Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese Vasco da Gama came to the East African coast.
African history starts with the Portuguese. Yeah, right. African history starts with the Portuguese. That's crazy as shit.
Yes, so I was just going back before 1498, and I was just trying to explain to the family what was happening before 1498 on the African continent. I was saying there were many thriving empires on the African continent. We did have the Timbuktu, the Songhai, all these empires.
The Swahili Empire. The Songhai. You had the Manatapa Empire down there in Zimbabwe.
Yes, and also the construction of and also the construction of the Greater Zimbabwe Wall was done way before these Portuguese did come in, and everyone else did come in.
That shit was done thousands of years ago. Thousands of years ago. Thousands. The European, when he got there, the European must have done it. Who just got out the caves and just got out, started leaving Europe 400 years ago. We created these. Somewhere we created these walls and shit. That was the lie they kept there. We did it. We just came out of Europe 400 years ago, but we created these walls that are thousands of years old. We did it. Like, shit be crazy.
It doesn't. Everything good. They have everything good. They have claimed it. They have claimed it for themselves. But let me tell you where the problem did start. Apart from the lack of knowledge of our history, the other problem did start with the introduction of religion on the African continent. Like you did have the decline of the Congo Empire came with the introduction of the Christian religion by the Portuguese on the African continent. And let me play a little bit of this, and then we shall continue with what has been done.
That's why Queen Azinga rejected that shit. She rejected that shit. She only used it politically. She only pretended to change, but she rejected that shit. Like, I use it for these white people. They can say, hey, this lady, the Portuguese, hey, this lady's pretending to be a Christian. Yeah, she wasn't taking none of that shit in. Go ahead, Mike.
But let me play a little bit over this so that you can see where the damage also comes in with these kingdoms in Africa.
For the Congo Empire. In 1492, Congo was just being introduced to Christianity for the first time by the disingenuous motive for Africa. It was the beginning of the end of Njemi from the Bulala. This event was no doubt one of the greatest moments in Central African history and the most important event for the survival of the Kanem Empire's legacy. Also in Central Africa, it was the beginning of the end for the Congo Empire. In 1492, Congo was just being introduced to Christianity
Get
for
him
the
in.
first time by the disingenuous motives of the Portuguese. King Nzinga Mkulu sent his ambassador Kasuta to Portugal and instructed him to request priests, carpenters, and stonemasons to build a house of prayer. He also sent Congolese nobles and children to learn Portuguese and become Christians. In 1491, King Nzinga Mkulu of Congo was
That didn't make no
baptized.
sense to me. It's like the African.
His baptism was well documented, as he said to have sat on a
It's like
throne
these
carved,
morons. It's like these
which
African
was
leaders were complete morons.
he also wore a tall crown.
You can see them getting
African
baptized.
chiefs sold out Africa. These African chiefs sold out Africa.
Once they did get
Yeah,
baptized,
they
that
were
was it.
morons. They get the whole tradition. That was all over the African continent. Yeah, that was the end fight. They gave the whole tradition, gave their people up because you had morons as leaders. And we had you had a time in African history, sadly enough, that they were going to sleep and all the leaders were morons. And it came at a time more crucial for the Africans that your leadership were all idiotic and dummies. That was dangerous.
And also,
that the leaders
and
were
also
all
what-
dummies and subjugated. Go ahead.
I'm saying also what they did was strive for the integration of the Portuguese in Congo. Striving to have the Portuguese integrated and giving them land. This is what did happen. A little bit over this.
The primary reason for the conversion of King Nzinga Mkulu was articulated by Alan Schofield. It was only then the Portuguese learned the real reason for the quick conversion. The kingdom was on the point of civil war. Several people were rebelling against the central power, and that Mwenyeji Congo was about to help his son, Alfonso, put down the revolt. Naturally, he wanted Portuguese aid. One must try to imagine the Portuguese at this moment. There were not many of them by comparison with their black host. They had come to this remote place to proselytize and begin a trading organization. And within a few
be your friend.
they were being asked to take part in a war which did not concern them in the least. But the request came from a brother in Christ, and it was not possible to refuse. So a black army marched out on the Central African field of battle under the banner of the cross, accompanied by a number of white mercenaries carrying muskets. It is hardly surprising that they won the day and returned to the
Then
capital.
I'll take over other African people.
The Mwenyeji Congo settled the Portuguese in one section of the town, not too far from his own palace, and the two races lived in such amity that doors, it is said, were never closed, and there was no need for guards. The coexistence had begun. Even though King Nzinga Mkulu clearly had other motivations for his conversion, the actions he took to integrate the Portuguese into Congolese society had disastrous effects, especially because his son, a true convert to Christianity, thought of the Portuguese as his Christian brothers, while they certainly did not think of him or the Congolese as such.
That is a Christian brother.
That is about the Muslim brothers. These are Muslim brothers. Only Africans, exactly, like only Africans think this dumb shit. The Muslim brother, the Christian brother, he don't want to dominate and subjugate your dumb black ass.
They were just waiting for the perfect time to it's like a lion waiting to pounce on a gazelle or to make it move and just come and
exactly.
tear apart.
Because they know if you read the documents, Mike, it said all the Europeans said these Africans are childlike people. They actually believe in trust and honor. They're childlike. They call the African a child. He's a moron. He's a moron. He's a child. He believes that people really want to be his friend, and people believe what they say. The African didn't know that white people lie, and they lie all the time. They weren't used to having people just lie all the time. That wasn't African culture. African culture is based on you being true.
I don't know, Kida, do we still have your audio? I think I lost your audio. Would like to know. Zeno Mosquito saying a good day. I think you're asking if his spikes are frozen. No, I'm not. But if you cannot hear my audio, please do let me know. We are talking about the decolonizing of the African mind, and we do say two of the biggest challenges is one, the lack of a proper knowledge on our African history and our heritage. People will lie to you and tell you that Africans were living in the most primitive sorts of ways before the European came. People were living in the caves and the forest and things like these, with the animals and eating all sorts of things. But just do a little bit of your own research on history and find out there were thriving empires before the European came. We did not have any diseases on the continent of Africa before these Europeans came and brought diseases on the people and the animals. And we also need to know about the impact of religion, like you did here. When the Portuguese did convert the leaders of the Congo Empire into Christianity, that was the beginning of the end for that particular empire. And you also have to question yourself, has religion done anything that has actually uplifted the status of the African, or have actually helped the African get into the next level in terms of social economic matters, in terms of political matters, in terms of being all around better? There is nothing that it has done. What has been done is religion has been used to subjugate the African and make them have the inferior kind of a mindset. They will feel that the savior, which is a white man complex, is what they need. The Portuguese did come in. We also did have the Belgians later. That was later on with the King Leopold, who did come in into the Congo. The first we did have the Portuguese, and later on we did have the King Leopold. And King Leopold, when he was coming into the Congo, what has been said is that he was saying that he wants to come and civilize the African. Most of the European colonizers, and in those days they used to go with the name explorers, or people who trying to find adventure and discover the new world in Africa. Most of these people had no. You are not coming to civilize people that are already civilized and they are living well. Like you did have, there was different kinds of empires and they were thriving. The colleges in Timbuktu did exist even before the European came on the continent of Africa. So how are you coming to colonize people who do even have colleges and learning institutions, who do have proper organized learning, while in your own continent you do not have such? In your own continent, you do not have such of a proper organized learning systems and colleges, but you have them on Africa before 1492, and then come up and say, oh, we are on a mission, we want to go and civilize these people, they are living in primitive ways. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that Africans have actually, one of the biggest lies that Africans have come to believe and embrace, which have left our minds colonized. There are so many writers that have written about the matter of the colonizing of the African mind, and I want to refer to us to some particular literature. Some of this literature on the decolonizing of the African mind has been done by one popular writer on the African continent. He is actually Kenyan, and he goes by the name Ngugi wa Thiong'o. This is Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and his book is known as Decolonizing the Mind. Decolonizing the Mind. He was also a theorist, or he was also a critic. He is a writer who has written matters on different issues, most of them also revolving around the colonization of the Kenyan people, the colonizing of the Kenyan people. And the work of linguistic decolonization cannot be done by writers alone. It also has to be done by other different people. We do have Chinua Achebe, who also wrote the book known as Things Fall Apart, and he also wrote another book known as No Longer at Ease. And these are some of the writers who have shared maybe perhaps some of their experiences, or perhaps some of what they're thinking on what damage that the colonizing of the African mind has, the damage the colonizing of the African mind has done. So I do believe, yes, you can actually get to check out this particular book, The Decolonizing of the Mind by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and get to understand a little bit of the political thinking. He does get to look at the political and social economic aspects of the impact of colonizing of the African people. But I do believe the impact goes much more deeper. You cannot talk about just the physical, the political, and the economic. There are many other ways. And this, of course, like I said, has been done by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He is one of the Kenyan novelists. He did write on he's a post-colonial theorist, and he has done many essays, which include Dreams in a Time of War. That is one of his most popular books, A Dream in a Time of War. And the Decolonizing of the Mind is a meld of autobiography, post-colonial theory, pedagogy, and also African history and literary criticism, which has been done by this particular writer. There are so many other people that have written on the same. I will be sharing a few more of the writers who have written on the same in terms of unchaining the African mind as well. There's also another writer, Unchaining of the African Mind. Let me bring this up. This is also another piece of literature that has been put together. But for me, my contention is that the two biggest tools, there are many other tools that have been used. Everything, of course, has been weaponized. All these other things have actually been weaponized into, making sure that the African remains at the bottom. But for me, I do contend, my contention is that the two biggest weapons that have been used against the African to keep his mind colonized is a lack of proper history on our past. The lack of a proper knowledge on African history. And the second thing has been religion. If African people want to be able to rise beyond the ignorance, and this ignorance, I'm thinking about the ignorance related to not knowing anything or not having any interest in terms of getting to discover yourself what was happening in Africa, what is African history, where are our people coming from, and what are our strengths. If we are not able to have this kind of knowledge and the information on our history, then we cannot be able to unchain the mind of the African or decolonize the mind of the African. The second part is also the religion. The religion has also binded the mind of the African. And I do believe even perhaps it was also weaponized for the African mind. And you remember when there was King Leopold inviting the Catholic missionaries, he invited them into the Congo. He did write a letter to them, and this letter, I do believe, also constitutes a big element of the colonizing of the African mind, because it says that he should make them have all sorts of, what can I call it? Want to have wealth in terms of spiritual wealth, or in terms of just have a detachment from material wealth, because that is one of the things that was written. I will be sharing that particular letter that was sent by King Leopold and to the missionaries, and the missionaries also did come in Africa with also another purpose of colonizing the mind of the African, or spreading the religion on the African continent. But yes, there are many other books that have been written. Literature. This is the Unchaining of the African Mind, the Untold History of the Black African, written by Edmond Owusu. This, I do believe, is also another Kenyan that has put his thoughts together in terms of, just trying to help people understand better. There's also another work that has been put together known as the Decolonizing the African Mind, done with a Nigerian. I do believe this is Chinwezu. And I do believe there are lots of many other literatures. I have not been able, I have not gotten my hand on all these particular literature. But I also do get to aspire to know about the thoughts of other different thinkers in terms of how or what can be done to decolonize the African mind. But I do say my contention is that the African mind has been colonized first and foremost because of lack of knowledge of African history. If you do not arm yourself with proper knowledge of African history, you will not be able to decolonize your mind. You will still remain there and think of matters as they have been told to you. The kind of a thing that you might have will be a thinking based on what the European has told the African, or what the European has been teaching the African. And that is exactly what has our mind think that we are inferior, we are primitive, we are backward in thinking, nothing, we cannot amount to anything great. Everything about us has to be about following, not leading, and things like this. And also religion. Those are the two factors that I want to really just focus on today. And I wanted to share with us briefly King Leopold's letter to the missionaries and what was contained in these letters to the missionaries, because I do believe it's very, very important that you get to understand a little bit of the excerpt from the private letter of King Leopold to the missionaries. These were Catholic missionaries that came into the Congo. Like I said, the Congo by then had already been destroyed with the religion in 1492. But there was also more damage that was done by King Leopold. And this is a little bit of what was said. Reverend fathers, dear compatriots. When it comes to dear compatriots, it means that they are on the same agenda. The task that is given to fulfill the task that is given to fulfill is very delicate and requires much tact. And when it comes to this particular part of a tact, underline the word tact, because tact is a skill that you will use to colonize the mind of the people. It's a tact, it's a skill. And this skill has to do with also, what can I call it? Playing people or scamming people. You will go certainly to evangelize, but your evangelization must inspire above all Belgium interest. Come and colonize this African. Your principal objective in our mission in the Congo is never to teach the niggers to know God. This they already know. The King Leopold already knew that the African was spiritual. And this was written to the colonial missionaries in 1883. This was done in 1883. Yes, I do believe this was before. This was way before, because no, this was later. Sorry, this was later, because the first contact of Christianity in Congo was around 1490. In 1490, when the Portuguese were there in the Congo. So this was way too later. Close. This was 300 years later. In 1883, close to 400 years later. But the same kind of attack was being used to sort of brainwash the African, use religion, and continue to corrupt their mind. They speak and submit to a Mungu, one Zambi, one Zakomba, on what else I don't know. They know that to kill, to sleep with someone else's wife, to lie, to insult is bad. Have courage to admit it. You're going to teach them what they already know. Your essential role is to facilitate the task of the administrators and the industrials, which means you will go and interpret the gospel in a way it is best to protect your interest in that part of the world. And there is a long letter, which of course was put together. And like he said, the main goal of this particular one was mind control. And that is what has been used to make sure that the mind of the African is colonized even till today. Go talk to any African. And I even want to put it, I wish Kedo was here. I wish Kedo was here. Because I would also put this point across that the African, because of religion, you might even tell them about black hot fire. And the minute you say black hot fire, this is black, and say hot fire, they will associate that with hell, because this is hot fire. And the African has been told hell is made for you. You are the sinners. You are you are this and that. So you will be going to hell. So the minute you tell people black hot fire, and there is a black, they are black themselves, and then tell them about hot fire, because of this indoctrination with religion, you might find a nerve, you might strike a nerve in their thinking, and you might take them straight to hell. But you're just telling them this is black hot fire, and we want to empower people with information about how to awaken, and also how to know more about your African history, so that you can decolonize your mind. But at the end of the day, religion has done a lot on the African mind, and also with the matter of African history. But information will not come to you. It has to be upon you to go look for the information, because if you want to now, they do say that learning something it might be difficult, but unlearning it is even much more difficult. You will tell people about now how to what are stories and what are facts. Go into facts, because it's facts. We did have these kingdoms before 1492, when the Portuguese came in. They were thriving empires, and people are doing well, living well in Africa. But people do not want to. It's called I believe it's cognitive dissonance. People do not want now to go back to the truth, because they have already been forced. They have already been indoctrinated with the lies, and therefore you wonder, if I leave these lies, my life will be empty. If I leave these lies about, for example, if you told your kids, Santa is not real and things like this, and they have grown up for like 15 years, not about Santa and his presence, and then one day they realize Santa is just a big ass lie, they would rather just live with the Santa lie because of a cognitive dissonance, because that makes them feel nice. It makes them feel, what can I call it? I'm looking for this word. It makes them have that association with a lie that sort of give them ideas in their heads. So you may need to put the record straight and tell them this is a whole big lie. There's nothing like Santa coming or giving presents and things like this. They will feel hurt, and they will feel, no, we'd rather just stick to the narrative. And that is what has been happening with the African. But nonetheless, we are winding up. I just want to share my 2 cents on what we can do to decolonize the African minds. We do have other facets, or we do have other tools that have been used to colonize the African minds. We shall be discussing them on other subsequent episodes. But I do believe for today we have covered at least 2 items, and we shall be discussing much more on. We shall do a second part of a little bit of this presentation, which will be the decolonizing of the African mind part 2. But for today, I want to thank General Mosquito. I want to thank Sister Lightbearer. I want to thank Samuel, who was with us all the way in Jamaica, Clarendon. A much peace and love to you. I hope that you are doing right, and this particular day is finding you in all good health. We shall be winding up with the same song. This was Jamaica in New York. Sorry, Jamaican in New York, and it is what it is. It is what it is. African has to, put it upon himself the responsibility of actually decolonizing their own mind. No one will actually do it for us. No one will actually come up and enlighten us unless we seek to do it by our own self. It has been wonderful just getting to connect with you. And this is a little bit of the same exam we started with. This is a Jamaican in New York.
Yeah, oh man, yo, shining again. Really now. We know everything now. See, something like I'm trying to say. Yes. But I think it's my day. And I love my morning ride. You can see it in my motions when I walk.